So, Brexit. I was going to do a short piece asking what the consequences of no deal would be on the UK economy. And so I started researching and writing and doing more researching, and I read bits of the 1972 UK accession treaty, and I did more research, and before I knew it, I realised that the story I wanted to tell wasn't going to fit into 8 minutes or even 18 minutes. This then is merely part one, and I'm calling it How We Got Here and What We Want. Okay, cue the music.
Before we found you, before we found you.
So, let's turn the clock back to the beginning of 1973. Colour TVs were increasingly common, but were still outnumbered more than 3-1 by black and white. Edward Heath was in number 10, and Anthony Barber had just delivered a budget that would set in motion a rapid boom and bust. It also marked the entry of Britain, as well as Ireland and Denmark, into the European Economic Community, or EEC. Not everyone was enthused by the decision to join. Hugh Gateskill, the previous leader of the Labour Party, said it would mean the end of Britain as an independent European state, the end of 1,000 years of history. But the UK had been a sickly economy, and the Six, as the members of the EEC were known, had outgrown it. Britain's traditional trading partners in the Commonwealth, that is, the former British Empire, were becoming less important. Partly this was because of protectionist governments in India and Pakistan. Partly it was because Caribbean countries were small and commodity dependent. But mostly it was because of geography. Canada and Australia were increasingly trading with the US and Japan over the UK. And so, for economic reasons and with little enthusiasm for the project of ever closer union, the UK joined the EEC on the 1st of January 1973. But we weren't full members at first. The tariffs between Britain and the EEC were dismantled over the course of 4.5 years, only ending in the middle of 1977. There were other transitional measures too. Previously, bananas from Jamaica, for example, came into the UK tax-free. In the future, they'd be subject to the common external tariff. To ease the transition, the EEC and the UK agreed a complex transitional period detailed in Protocol 18 of the Treaty of Accession. Now, because I don't want to lose all my viewers so early in the video, I will just note that the process took until mid-1980 to complete. It was, in effect, a 7-year transition. Why is this important? Well, back in 1972, before Britain joined the EEC, exports were just 20% of GDP, and only a fifth of that number went to the Commonwealth. So these transitional agreements covered just 4% of the economy. Today, trade with the European Economic Area accounts for 15% of GDP. Which brings us neatly to 2018, and almost exactly 2 years since the UK voted to leave the EU. This is Theresa May, and I think it's fair to say she's not enjoying being Prime Minister, but it's a hard job to quit. In my mind, she wants 4 things: to respect the result of the referendum, to hold her fractious party together, to avoid the succession of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and to manage the process of exiting without the economy taking a hit. The problem, of course, is that these options are hard to reconcile. Leavers worry that a deal will leave the UK outside the EU in name only, while some Remainers hope Brexit will be abandoned or that the whole thing will be a disaster so they'll be vindicated. Suspicion of motives is rife. Never have the good intentions of so many been so doubted. And of course, most of the British population just wish the Conservative Party could choose and achieve a Brexit. Theresa May started the negotiation process with a number of red lines. No ECJ oversight, no substantial payments to the EU, no free movement, and an independent trade policy. Helpfully, Michael Barnier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, produced a slide on exactly what this means. Specifically, it means that the relationship is either similar to that enjoyed by South Korea and Canada, or there's no deal at all. So why the fuss? Can we not all agree to a Canada-type arrangement now and move on? Well, there are 3 reasons why this hasn't happened. The first is cars, and specifically the assurances that the UK government made to Nissan and other manufacturers in the immediate aftermath of the referendum. The UK is an efficient assembler of cars. If you look at the G7 over the period since 1995, only 3 countries have increased automotive production: Germany, the US, and the UK. We produce around 1.7 million cars a year. Assuming a free trade agreement with the EU, what's the problem? Okay, graphics time. Here's the UK. And let's assume it has an FTA with the EU and South Korea here. Now, South Korea already has an FTA with the EU here. So, nice triangle. Now, this means we should be able to continue to export cars to Korea tariff-free post-Brexit, yes? Quite possibly not, because of what are called rules of origin. Based on existing treaties, for a car to be exported to Korea tariff-free, That means 45% of that car has to be made locally, i.e. in the EU or the UK. This means that even if we successfully and rapidly replicate the EU's existing free trade agreements, it's quite possible that a substantial minority of British cars will no longer be eligible for tax-free export because they contain French tyres and German engines and Norwegian aluminium. This is a particular issue for the UK because we don't have cheap energy for producing steel or aluminium or a comprehensive automotive supply chain, and because many high-end cars such as Jaguars, Aston Martins or Range Rovers are exported beyond the EU. Because of this, and because car manufacturing tends to run with such lean supply chains, the UK government wants the automotive sector to have deeper integration into the EU single market than other sectors. We call this a win-win option, and the EU calls it cherry picking. The second issue is financial services. Here, the UK wants to continue to be the place where those who need capital are connected with those who have it. There are probably more hedge funds and asset managers in London than in the rest of the EU combined. Almost every US or Asian or indeed German bank has the bulk of its European capital markets, i.e. trading and corporate finance, activities in London. And this means ancillary services are there too. Want a financial PR company to tell investors about your IPO? Don't worry, London has loads. Want lawyers used to handling complex multi-jurisdictional issues associated with your M&A transaction? Yep, London has them. Accountants and tax planners? Them too. Right now, London monopolises European capital markets. And there are three threats the UK is looking to ameliorate via a deal with the EU. Firstly, while passporting is not on offer, some degree of equivalence would make life easier. Is someone regulated by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority allowed to advise a German fund manager on an investment in an Italian company? Secondly, to what extent will banks be required to have risk takers in the same place as their capital? Can Deutsche Bank's traders sit in London while the bank's capital is, largely, in Germany? Now, it would be great to say yes and move on. But if the ECB is backstocking Deutsche Bank, yet has no regulatory oversight of where capital is deployed, that will be an issue for them. The third problem is to do with clearing. Now, people tend to think that clearing euros is a bit like a bank clearing checks. It's not. Clearing refers to people who act as counterparties, specifically in derivatives contracts. So when Goldman Sachs goes long French share index futures, its counterparty is a clearinghouse. These institutions are important because they're implicitly backed by the government, the Bank of England and the ECB. That means Goldman doesn't have to worry about the creditworthiness of their counterparty and prevents markets from drying up at times of stress. To achieve this, clearing houses sit on deposits from banks and charge them or refund them capital on a day-to-day basis according to the movement of their positions. The problem with Brexit is this. The ECB has said it won't backstop the clearing of euro-denominated derivatives outside its regulatory jurisdiction and over which it exercises no oversight. The effect of this will be to drive clearing of euro-based derivatives away from London clearinghouses and inside the Eurozone, where they can benefit from ECB backing. The UK would like seamless backstopping of clearing between the EU and the UK, so derivatives trading remains in London. The third area where the UK is struggling to find a compromise that works is Northern Ireland. In the referendum in 2016, Northern Ireland voted 56 to 44 to remain in the EU. A substantial majority of Catholics voted to remain, and the Good Friday Agreement between Ireland and the UK requires both countries to work to integrate the economies of Ulster and the Republic. Now, the UK and Ireland have agreements for passport-free travel via the Common Travel Area. The 1949 Ireland Act long predates the establishment of the EEC or the EU and means Irish citizens in the UK are not treated as aliens and enjoy the same rights to work and vote as British citizens. So the reality is that the Northern Irish border will continue to be soft from a practical perspective. However, unless the UK remains inside the EU's customs union, there will need to be some kind of customs infrastructure. But this is not as big an issue as people like to make out. If a Belfast firm sends to a Dublin firm today, it already goes through a series of procedures to make sure it collects the right amount of VAT. The process for exporting to or importing from Ireland when it's outside the EU will be barely more difficult. There are technical challenges that need solving, but most inter-Ireland trade goes along relatively few routes, so few customs posts will be needed. The best comparison is probably the border between Switzerland and France. It's largely seamless and firms send goods across the border easily. Yes, there will be costs, most specifically to small business owners in the border region, but to most Northern and Republic of Ireland citizens, the border will be no more onerous than currently. However, there are two issues that need to be dealt with. Firstly is the backstop that the UK agreed with the EU. This agreed that in the absence of another solution, then Northern Ireland would remain, from an economic perspective, part of the EU, effectively putting the customs border in the Irish Sea. For those with a pedantic bent, there are a surprising number of examples of bits of countries being inside other countries' customs areas. So, Bosengen, for example, is a German town inside the Swiss customs area. But that's by the by. It would not be politically or economically acceptable for Northern Ireland, which has far more trade with Great Britain than the Republic of Ireland, to remain a part of the EU. Specifically, the Conservative Party's coalition partners, the DUP, would veto such a plan. Secondly, there's the issue of communication. To many in Northern Ireland, the tone of much of the British Conservative Party, traditionally a defender of the Union, has been to sacrifice them on the altar of Brexit. Both Northern Ireland and the Republic lose most of all from a no-deal, hard Brexit. Rather than engaging with the Commission on this issue, the British government will be better off with a charm offensive on the Emerald Isle. Now, I'm not going to cast nasturtiums here. Well, not many. The British government and press accuse the EU of refusing to negotiate, which is true. The EU accuses the British government of demanding things it is simply not willing to offer, which is also true. And so the UK and the EU continue to stumble towards a potentially nasty no-deal, no-transition Brexit. Before I sign off, let me say this. The shape of the relationship between the EU and the UK immediately post-Brexit is not the most important thing. I think we all fixate too much on the choice between Switzerland minus and Canada plus plus and CETA or WTO. Rather, what matters is that the path there is orderly. It took us 2 years of intensive preparation, followed by 7.5 years of transition for us to join the EEC. Stumbling into WTO on March 29th next year without any preparation would be, well, I think you're going to have to watch my next video for that. And thanks for watching, and if you haven't already done so, then please hit subscribe.
Through the storm we reach the shore. You give it all, but I want more. And I'm waiting for